Hey everyone, I'm Kevin with Victory 4x4. In this video we're going to be installing our universal truck bed slide in the back of our 4th generation Tacoma. So we've got a handful of components here that you're going to need to assemble to get your bed slide in your truck. We're going to start out with the main center panels here, or frame panels if you will, as well as the tie-in support bracket that's going to bolt to the center, but additionally we do have the outside rails, the front and back panel, as well as the trim and handle, and of course the main slide mechanisms over here. So some of this we will have to get out of the way. We're going to be installing this in our 4th generation Tacoma that's here behind me, but it is somewhat of a universal product, so there's going to be several trucks that it fits in. So pay attention to the product page where you purchase this item to see more info there on compatible models and hopefully some more photos as well of this installed in those specific trucks. To get started, you really only need 1/2 of this main center frame as well as that center support bracket or brace, if you will. That is going to slide in underneath here with the kind of U or opening down toward the bottom. And then you're going to be assembling this using the 1/2 inch long 1/4-20 button heads with washers and flanged nuts. Pay close attention to these because there's both 1/2 and 3/8 long in there, so they're easy to get confused if you're not paying attention. And then it's just a matter of getting those installed top down in all 6 of the mounting holes along here. With that loosely attached here in the center, you want to go ahead and leave that hardware loose, and you can then grab the other side and basically do the same thing. You'll just slide it right over top of here and install 6 more of those 1/4-20 button heads. Once you have all that hardware loosely installed across the center, it's really just a matter of lining these up, so kind of checking the ends. There's only a little bit of compliance there for assembly, so it shouldn't be able to move too far. And then grab a 5/32 hex, possibly a 7/16 wrench as well, if for whatever reason those serrations on the nuts aren't grabbing. And then you can just work your way down here and tighten all 12 of these up. Next, you can grab the front and back panels for this slide. Essentially, they're going to install the same way. You're going to put these slotted or horizontally slotted holes up toward the top, and then there's going to be 4 holes out here on the frame that are going to line up with this panel. Orientation doesn't really matter. It's symmetric in that sense, this one as well. And then you'll grab 4 more for each one of those 1/2 inch long 1/4-20 button heads with washers and nuts once again, and get these going on here. From here, you can grab at least 1 slide to start bolting it to that frame. These are side specific, so you got to kind of start paying attention at this point. They're labeled with an L and an R, but left and right is kind of relative when you're working on this, because basically whatever end you put the operating lever on is going to be the rear, if you will. Once it's in the truck, the end you're actually going to function and pull this in and out from. So grab the correct side here, make sure that is going down to operate the slide, and then you're going to pull this essentially all the way out, because we'll be bolting this portion of it to this main center frame section to start with. So basically you got to get it laid out alongside here. Now, coming in here close to locate this properly, again, you want to make sure this presses down to operate, and then basically you're just going to line this front edge of the slide up with the front edge of the frame. You want to have now the 3/8 long 1/4-20 button head with washers once again. This will go through the bottom hole here and into the first hole on your slide, which is going to want to flop over like that. If you have a squeeze clamp or something, you can throw that on there, but not too big of a deal. Once you have it up there, you can just kind of pinch it like that. And then we do provide a blue medium strength thread locker here. You want to use that on every one of these, since these get a non-flange, non-locking nut. So those are still just a hex nut. They're going to be a little shallower than the flange nuts that you had. And you can then start all of those by hand, and then you will want a 7/16 socket to to kind of hold this while you tighten up the other side with your 5/32 hex. As you work your way down the slide getting your hardware installed, keep in mind that you will have to slide this back and forth to use the cutout that they provide to line up some of these hole locations and then get your hardware installed in there. As you get ready to bolt the slides on here, you're going to notice that you have two sets of holes. The bottom set is what you're aiming for here, and really that's going to go for either orientation, so this can be assembled as we have it here, kind of as more of a tray that you're going to set your fridge or other gear down into, or we can flip this over and use it like more of a platform. And with it flipped over, once again, you'll select the bottom hole when bolting that slide in, and the only real difference here is that you'll need to flip this center support into the underside when getting it bolted together, so you're left with a nice flat platform all the way across here. You'll be installing that hardware in every hole that lines up between the slide and the tray assembly here. You can then go repeat this process over on the other side. Once you have those slides on both sides and you have them fully extended like we have them here, you can grab the side rail. It's going to slide in underneath with this longer mounting flange tucking in under the rail, and then you'll slide it basically until the back edge of this side rail is flush with the back edge of the slide assembly itself here. And then you can start, you'll have to kind of lift it into position, but you can start lining up and installing hardware there, again using the shorter 3/8 long button heads with washers and the non-flange nuts. This time you're going to run these from the outside in, so you have the nice button head visible on the outside and the nut tucked down in here. Now we can assemble the ends. So first you want to make sure that you close these slides all the way up so you have your operating levers here as well as everything just kind of in that closed position. You can grab the end plate here and slide it on with these horizontal slots setting up or toward the top, and then grab your press lever. I've already installed one end of this here. It's just got two of those 1/4-20 button heads in place there. We'll do the same thing out on this side. So you need to have these little guys with pre-installed nuts on here. You'll set it in there so that it creates kind of a clamp or a clamshell, and then get just one bolt started in this inside location. And with that in place, you can slide it over the operating levers on both sides and install that second bolt. Once you have this in hand, it's going to be kind of obvious where this has to sit. You want to leave a small gap, roughly about 1/8 of an inch here behind it, kind of make sure that's even all the way across. And then you do have like a small little nub, if you will, that hangs down on these that'll kind of stop you from pulling it out off of the end. So find that spot where it sits nice and tight when you're pinching these ends. And then basically what I like to do is just take a pair of pliers. You can always add a small rag in here or a little tape on these to protect the powder coat, but just so you can see what we're actually doing here, you're just going to squeeze these together so that they have a little preload on them, and tighten both of your bolts in here. Then you can come over and do the same thing on the other side. And that way this will stay nice and tight and be kind of rattle free when operating. Once you're happy with that, grab the gray textured outer trim plate. You're going to install button heads in the 4 top holes here as well as the 2 bottoms tucked down in here. So this should all just line up with existing holes on this cover panel. And now you're securing this through the outer trim plate, that black cover panel, and into the slide assembly. With all that hardware in and tightened up, just make sure that this seems to function and operate properly and smoothly, and then make any minor adjustments if needed. You can then flip this thing around and install the much simpler back panel, which is just 4 mounting holes, and make sure you keep those horizontal slots up toward the top once again. If you do encounter any minor alignment issues, which you might until this thing is fully bolted together and bolted in the truck, you can just slide your 5/32 Allen in one of these holes, and you can see then how you can manipulate that to help you line some of these up. So that might help you out along the way. With all 4 of those tightened up, this is now complete, and this whole assembly is ready to be installed in the truck. With your slide fully assembled, you're ready to start mounting it up in the truck. This is going to vary a little bit from truck to truck, but specifically something we encountered here on our Tacoma, since we have our bed stiffeners installed on this one, we do need to remove the factory lower cargo hook or tie down hook that's in here. That's just because the bed stiffener spaces that up a material thickness on that bracket. So a T40 Torx will remove that. And then since this is a shouldered bolt, we do have to do something about that. So I have a 7/16 USS washer. You could also just use a regular 1/2" washer here that we'll put back in to take its place, and then tighten that back up. And that'll solve that problem for us. So if you encounter the same thing, that's the solution there. From there, you want to know where you plan to place it in the bed. In our case, we're going to be pushing it all the way over to this driver's side, or at least as far as we can, which we'll show you in just a minute how to line the rest of that up. But basically, it's going to sit over top of the bed stiffener here, and we're going to be drilling through and installing rib nut inserts on the raised rib portion of this bed in a couple different spots. As far as placement in the bed, it is somewhat up to you. You do have to consider a few different things. You want to make sure that if for any reason, if you're pulling it off of the bed face up at the front, you still have enough clearance to close your tailgate. So make sure you're not slid too far back this way. If you have a bed front molly panel installed, that might interfere depending on the vehicle. This one here on our Tacoma seemed to clear just fine, so we're going to leave that in place up front, and then basically just push this pretty much tight to it. We'll probably leave a small 1/8" gap or so just for a little bit of clearance. You are going to have to slide this all the way out to access and mark all your holes up there. So with that in mind, this thing is going to want to teeter a little bit. Even with the tailgate down, you're going to need something in here to kind of shim it if you want to try and keep it nice and level in there. But all the way out with this board under it, this is just essentially a 2x4 here. It's not going to flip. I can still put a little weight on it, so you don't have to be concerned about that. Just know that it's going to move around a little bit. When it comes to selecting and drilling hole locations up here, there's a couple things to consider. As always, you're going to have things like wiring and fuel lines and such underneath the truck that you don't want to drill into. Specifically on the composite bed in this Tacoma, we've got some raised rib bracing under there that saves us because it gives you about a 2" clearance window anywhere underneath here. The only thing is you don't want to drill into those ribs. So you could spend a ton of time measuring and everything underneath there and trying to plot this thing out. And if you want to do that, great, that works for you. I'm just going to take a small 1/8" bit, and I'm going to pick 4 holes on here, and then we can just jump underneath real quick before we drill to that larger hole size and just make sure that those are all in good, safe, accessible locations. So we're going to have you install at least 4 of those rib nuts per side or per rail, just due to the fact that there's going to be a decent amount of leverage on this thing. When you have it fully loaded and slide it all the way out, you want to get at least 4 of those in the back half of this, or I guess front half, the way we're looking at it here. Basically at least 4 of them past halfway on this end, so you have plenty of support out here with this thing fully open. Keeping that in mind, I can't come all the way to the end on this truck because these ribs kind of angle down as they get to the front. So we'll take the second one in here, and I'm just going to push this down tight and mark the front and back edge of the slotted hole location there. I'm then just going to skip one and do the same thing right here. And then I'll come back to this end and basically do that same thing. I'm kind of going to skip the end hole location again on this truck. That's because there is a metal, I believe it's aluminum, brace structure that runs underneath that end, and I want to miss that and just get into the composite so that we can access it once again from underneath and make sure it's in a safe location. So skipping one, I'll mark front and back edge of the hole here. Skip another one, mark front and back edge of the hole here. And then I'll just do the same thing over on this other side, trying to make sure that we keep these nice and evenly spaced out from the panel here at the front. But again, as long as they're both locked all the way open, that should be pretty straightforward. With that slide out of the way, you now have your marks in here. Essentially, you want to select as close to the center of the rib as possible, so you have as much surface area for that rib nut to install as possible. So do that at every hole location. And then aiming for the center of that, I'm just going to grab, like I said, an 1/8 inch bit. On this composite bed, a good sharp bit starts pretty easily, but on any sort of sheet metal bed, you're going to want to center punch this as well. And then we'll basically just repeat that at all of our hole locations before we go underneath and check for clearance. All those hole locations looked great on this Tacoma as far as clearance goes. So from here moving forward, we basically just need to step up through a series of drill bits to reach a 17/32 drill bit size. That may more than likely be the only tool that you don't have in your arsenal to get this thing done. So that might be something you got to order or pick up. So keep that in mind before you go to start your install. If you have a step bit or a unibit, this will get you pretty close, but once again, you want to finish off with that 17/32. So you can do that, kind of step up close to it, and then finish up with that hole, or use a small series of drill bits to get there. Clearing away some of those shavings, you then want to have one of your rib nuts to test fit. I have one here on the tool that we provide, which is essentially just a 5/16 bolt, a washer, an oversized nut, another washer, and then you thread the rib nut itself on here. You do want these to be a little bit snug as you put them in here, so keep that in mind. You don't want those to wiggle too much, but if it is for any reason too tight and you can't get that in with just kind of light to moderate pressure, you can very lightly just clearance that out with your 17/32 and keep moving forward. To use the tool we provide, you need an 11/16 wrench and a 1/2 inch socket. So the wrench is just to hold that oversized nut so that the bolt can spin inside of it. And you then want to make sure that you're pressing down on this so that the rib nut is seated nice and tight against this surface while you go to tighten it up and compress it against this material. Now with this smaller impact, it kind of labors to the point that it stops this impact at about the right time when they're nice and compressed. If you're using a larger impact, you run the risk of essentially pulling or stripping the threads out of that, so keep that in mind. And then there are tons of different rib nut installation tools on the market if you wanted to pick one of those up rather than using this, but this will get the job done, especially for just these 8 rib nuts. So from there, you can just go repeat that process for the remaining 7. After those rib nuts are in, you can get your bed slide back in here, and then you're going to want to find the stainless 1 inch long 5/16 hex bolts with washers, since these are dissimilar metals, and you also run the risk of these encountering water, salt, corrosion, road grime, whatever the case may be, since they're exposed underneath the bed. We recommend a little bit of anti-seize there to prevent you any issues in the future. And then you'll work your way through and start all of these by hand. From here, it's just a matter of tightening these up. So you'll need a 1/2 inch wrench. With the way we've got this pushed all the way over, since they wind up tucked under the slide just a little bit, the rest you should be able to get to with a socket. The only critical thing there is making sure that the width stays nice and even, so you can tape measure that, or just kind of slide this in as you do each one, so you have the back of the slide nice and close to where you're tightening. That should hold them pretty close to the correct location. With everything tight, your install is pretty much complete. It's just a good idea to come back through and do one last function test. make sure everything is operating properly. And then it's just up to you to accessorize it and outfit it with whatever gear suits your needs best. As always, if you guys have any questions about this installation or anything we offer here at Victory 4x4, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always send us an email at info@victory4x4.com or call us at 269-459-8447.